Hello and welcome back to the Food Fight Show. It's been a long time since we've done an episode, but we're back. I believe this is episode number 103, although probably I'm the only one who cares about episode numbers because, why would you care? You care about the topic that we're going to discuss, which today is going to be policy files. So we'll get to that in just a minute. First, I'd like to introduce myself. My name's Nathan Harvey. I work at Chef. I'm coming to you today live from my home office in Annapolis, Maryland. And before I get to introducing my co-host and the rest of our panelists, I just want to talk about a couple of things that we have coming up on the horizon here with Chef pretty soon. So actually, the place I'm going to be looking at, so that you can refer back to it later if you like, is on the Chef website, chef.io/events. This is the page where we list all of our upcoming events where Chef is either organizing the events or is going to be participating. So just to run down a couple that are coming up very soon here. On January 10th in Seattle, the Chef Meetup is going to meet. And in fact, that Chef Meetup group is going to meet in conjunction with a Chef Software Inc. company meeting where we fly in most of the company into our Seattle headquarters. And so on that evening, which is Tuesday, January 10th, we're going to have a game night. And we're inviting our local community or anyone who might be in Seattle that wants to join us for a game night. Come on in. We'll have board games, electronic games, whatever kind of games you might like. So come in and check that out. The following week on January 18th, there's a DevOps remote conference that's actually going to be January 18th and 19th. It runs from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Mountain Time. And I'll be presenting there on a DevOps topic. My talk is called Find Your Own DevOps Way. So it's all about doing just that. And this is cool because it's an online conference. So you can get together with your coworkers in a meeting room, a conference room, and over lunch or throughout the day, sort of watch talks from different folks from around the industry. On January 24th, there's a Microsoft Azure on Chef workshop that's happening. You can find out information there on our website. And then early in February 6th and 7th, there's an awesome conference that I highly recommend you all go to. It's called Configuration Management Camp. And Config Management Camp is a conference that this is our 4th year hosting that conference. It happens in Ghent, Belgium, right after FOSDEM, the Free Open Source Developers European Meeting Conference, which happens the weekend before that. So February 6th and 7th is Monday and Tuesday. The conference itself is free, so that's an easy way to go. Just tell your manager, I'm going to a free conference, and it will probably be fine. This conference, though, is really cool because we bring together all of the various configuration management communities. So it's really all about automation and configuration management. There will be representatives and community members there from Puppet, from Ansible, from MGMT, from Chef, of course. And we bring everyone together so that we can all sort of share our knowledge and learn from each other as communities. And then the final event that I want to talk about is one that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is ChefConf. ChefConf 2017 is coming up. It's not coming up right away. It's coming up in May. It's May 22nd through the 24th. It's going to be held in Austin, Texas, again this year. Maybe you joined us in 2016 in Austin and found that the venue was great, the city was great, but it was a little hot because, well, we held it in July. And July in Austin, very, very hot. So we've moved it earlier in the year this year, so we get the great city of Austin as our host again, but a little bit cooler temperatures, so May 22nd through May 24th. The reason I bring up ChefConf, though, today, and it's very important, the call for presenters is currently open. That call for presenters is going to close on January 18th, but we are looking for great stories to share with the Chef community. Whether it's your story of infrastructure automation or compliance automation, or the way your team has changed, or the way that your workflow has changed as you've moved through time and increased the velocity within your organization, we want to hear those stories. We're really looking for stories that go very deep on a technical level to stories that are, this is how I learned to do this particular thing. So any level of technical depth is great. And then, of course, they don't have to be technical stories also. As you know, the way that we work together as teams is very important. When we think about things like being inclusive and diversity, those are important topics that we should discuss at ChefConf as well. So I truly hope that you'll join us for ChefConf. And between now and January 18th, I hope that you'll submit a talk, a proposal for a talk at the conference. And you can find out all the information there at chefconf.com. Now, without further ado, let's move on to our panelists and guests. So joining me today for the first time as a co-host, and what certainly will not be the only time as a co-host, is Nell Shamrell. Nell, hello.
Hello, Nathan. It's fantastic to be here. Wonderful to be a co-host, and I'm looking forward to doing this many more times. Greetings from Seattle, Washington, by the way.
Awesome. And Nell and I have been talking, and we really want to make sure that we're committed to keeping the Food Fight Show alive and strong and going in 2017. So we're getting a jump on that right now at the end of 2016, and we hope to have much more regular episodes. I think we did 3, maybe 4 in 2016. We'll have many, many more in 2017.
Absolutely.
All right. Yeah, so continuing on with our panelists, and today's topic is policy files. So I'm going to move on my screen from left to right across our panelists, and that brings us to you first, Dan.
Hi, so my name is Dan DeLeo. I'm a principal engineer at Chef, and I guess the main policy file person, author, but I guess as we might discuss, I couldn't have done it without tons of help from lots of people, so I'm not the only one.
Awesome, thanks, Dan. Next up is George.
Hey everyone, I'm George. I work at Chef. I'm part of the product marketing group. I've been spending some time trying to clarify our position around policy files and a couple of other products. You'll find that series on the Chef blog, and I'm super excited to be here. It's my first Food Fight show, so I'm stoked.
All right, welcome to the show, George. Next up, John Balone.
Hi, I'm John Balone. I'm head of configuration management and orchestration at Bloomberg, and I'm coming to you from a little bit chilly Arlington, Virginia, a little south of Nathan.
Awesome. And then last but certainly not least, Michael Hedgepeth.
Hi, I'm Michael Hedgepeth. I work at NCR as a software architect working on our Chef implementation, and I worked with Dan to prove out policy files for us, and we're big fans of policy files, so I'm looking forward to talking about this.
Awesome, that's great. So that's our entire panel for today, and so just right before we jump into our first question of the day, I want to remind you that if you have questions for our panelists, you can join us in the Chef Community Slack team. That's community-slack.chef.io to sign up. And within that team, we have a Food Fight channel. So if you have questions or comments that you'd like to share with the group, you can post those there as we go through this recording. Of course, if you're listening to the podcast, it's too late. We won't be taking any new calls. But if you're on right now, please give us those questions. So the first question I think that makes sense for us to start off with is policy files as our topic. We should ask what is a policy file and why? And Dan, I think you would probably be the best person for us to go to for that. So our question to you right now is why did you create policy files? What problems were they trying to solve?
Sure, so I guess a brief introduction. Policy file is a file or a set of files kind of similar to the way Burkshelf works for people who are familiar with that, or Bundler, or a whole family of sort of build and dependency management integrated tools. So a policy file allows you to define the run list for a node, some of its attributes, and where any cookbooks that you want to use should come from. And then it's integrated into the chef command in the chef.dk suite of tools. And when you run a command called chef install, that will produce a lock file which has the full solution set for everything you need for chef to run your code. So this is, if you're familiar with Burks, it's sort of, Burks file on steroids kind of thing. Burks works much the same way. We even share the same dependency solving code on the back end. But what a policy file gives you, in addition, are the attributes and the run list. So, so this moves from, I guess, sort of Chef as a bunch of different objects that all kind of live on their own and have their own life cycle, to more of a model where we're producing an immutable artifact.
And some of those objects, I imagine, are environments and roles and all the little bits that make a Chef thing work.
Yes, absolutely. And so that gets into the reasoning of why did I create this. So a big motivator was just ease of use. So I follow the Chef mailing list as closely as I can, and a lot of our other community support forums. And I try to interact with our community at the awesome community summits. Free shout out for Nathan for those. And you know, one sort of theme of where people have had trouble with Chef is, as a very new user, what are all these things and how do they work together? So I think by putting that into one file, it feels a little bit more concrete. And I think by putting all of the pieces together in one step that happens on your workstation, where you can observe what the outcome of that sort of, you know, mixing and baking process was, gives you a lot more confidence, especially as a new user, when you're starting to use Chef and you want to know, well, I did a thing on my workstation, what is going to be the outcome when I put this onto a server or into production?
One of the nice things I found with them is there's an air, maybe not quite 100% certainty, but I'd say at least like 95% certainty on what's going to happen when I upload that policy file, what it's going to do. And I know sometimes when you have a mix of roles and environments and other attributes, it's not always certain.
Yes, absolutely. One, I mean, getting into maybe a little nitty-gritty of a detail. So without policy files, when you run Chef client, it asks the Chef server for what cookbooks it should be using. And on the Chef server, that again runs a dependency solving algorithm. And there's no necessarily one right dependency solving algorithm, right? So it will get you a solution set that is valid given the constraints that you've given it, but there has to be a judgment call about one of these solutions is more valid than the other. So that at times can be surprising, and when it's surprising, that can mean that Chef client doesn't work, or it appears to work but doesn't do the thing that you thought, and that can have, you know, obviously a scary outcome when you're using this to manage your production systems. So I wanted to eliminate that kind of uncertainty and give you an opportunity to see that in a way that makes it a lot more visible to you. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, that was really the motivation for us to use the feature too, because when I started using Chef, I was very excited about it. We got a lot of people in our organization excited about it, but then we started thinking about what we will do about change management and security, which is very important to us. And so we have pretty advanced thoughts about it, I guess, since we are handling so many financial transactions. And so, you know, I'm sitting with people who think about that every day, and they say, well, how do I know that this change is going to go through the system, and the change that we're testing in an earlier environment is the same change that we tested in a later. And some of our more advanced listenership on this episode might think, well, I know exactly how to do that. I use Chef Workflow, or I use Jenkins, or whatever it is to manage that pipeline. But you know, when you're coming at Chef new, it's very difficult to say, well, I have this entire entire environment or system in order to guarantee consistency of what code I'm running to production. And the policy file feature really gave us that consistency and guarantee, and was kind of the do it. It opened to get us to production very rapidly without having a lot of other things to protect us from doing bad things in production.
Yeah, that's cool. And I'd just like to just really briefly kind of rewind a little bit and just clarify what when you've said, Dan, dependency management, sort of specifically what dependency management means and how like resolving what those dependencies are. So for those that perhaps many of our listeners, like this is very basic for, but not necessarily for everyone, but in Chef, the sort of unit of deployment is a cookbook. Each cookbook has a version, and cookbooks can be dependent on other cookbooks. And by having those various cookbook versions and dependencies, you can end up with a pretty complex tree of which cookbook versions work together with other cookbook versions and should be then in your run list. And so when it comes to dependency management, that's what you're talking about, right, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. And it looks very simple at first, but once you get cookbooks, let's see, I would say apt and yum are some of the most popular in terms of causing problems because they're depended upon by so many other cookbooks and may have breaking changes over time. You can often have the cookbooks that you really care about that are setting up your database or your web server, might start to fight over what version of that cookbook they'll accept. And that's a big case where you can get sort of surprising solutions, right? So the solution in this case being, you have some magical algorithm that says these 5 cookbooks work if you get exactly these versions together.
Yeah, that's awesome. John, you at Bloomberg are using Policyfiles. It sounded like Michael started off not using Policyfiles and then sort of migrated to them. Was your experience the same, and sort of what drove you to move from sort of traditional we manage a run list into Policyfiles?
Yeah, I definitely have to echo what Michael said earlier. It definitely changed management. I mean, being able to guarantee to my customers who are about the 4,000 engineers at Bloomberg, guarantee to my customers that their changes will not change after they commit them to a Chef repository on GitHub and they move through the testing pipeline. It's huge, and especially in our particular environment where we have quite an eclectic group of compute platforms. We deploy to Docker, we'll deploy to Solaris, AIX, several versions of Windows and Linux. So the fact that we have a huge build matrix already, it's just a lot more convenient for my team to be able to support the many engineers using Chef at Bloomberg. We originally did start out with using the Burke Shelf way, the Burke flow. And it worked very well for us. But then, that was only when there was a few teams using Chef, and more importantly, it was mostly my team, so it was easier to manage, communication between everyone. As it grew, as we started integrating Test Kitchen, some more of the Chef DK to the rest of the team, it was just a lot easier, not only to provide that consistency and guarantee to the customers, but also the ability to just provide a unified workflow using the Chef command. So we were easily able to tell people, listen, the Chef command is everything you need. We'll give you an instance that is fully capable of doing development internally with Chef, and it has all the tools that you need to actually, both build and deploy cookbooks.
That's awesome. So maybe someone could walk us through sort of how do I get started with Policyfiles? What are the steps that I need to take in order to go from the idea, I want to use a policy file for a given node. That node is now actually using the policy file.
I can give it a shot. I can give it a shot, Nathan. Is that all right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay. So what you do is you'll generally have a sort of base cookbook, something that is representation of a node, usually an application or website or something like that. And that's the easiest place to get started in, although the policy file is not tied directly to the cookbook. So inside of that website, cookbook, whatever it is, you'll put a policyfile.rb file. It's just a Ruby file. And at the top of it, you'll declare a name of your policy. So the policy name is like just a logical name of what the node is. You might think of it maybe as a role in the rest of the Chef terms. So you'll say web server or application name dash web server or something like that. Then the next thing you declare is your the default place where you want your dependencies to come from. So that'll usually be a supermarket. Thanks to Nell's awesome work, we have our own private supermarket that we use, and it's been fantastic and very easy and great to use. So we point it to our internal supermarket, and we use that as kind of an official, these are the cookbooks that are stable and have been through a pipeline location. And then the third thing that you declare is a run list, just like you would in if you're bootstrapping a node or something like that, all the cookbooks that you use. And the fourth thing that you can declare is if you want to pull your cookbooks from anywhere else, like a GitHub site or something like that, or even locally, you could do that. And those kind of are your exceptions that you would declare. And then finally, you can declare attributes that will get inserted into your cookbook. So that is your policy file. And you can think of a policy file as a declaration of what you want to be running on a node. So the next thing you do is you run a chef command called chef install on that policy file, and it will generate a policyfile.lock.json file, which if you open that up, it's got all the dependencies resolved. Like it says, I got this from the supermarket, but here is the checksum of the thing that of the cookbook contents that you got, and here's the exact URL that I got it from, or I got it from GitHub. Here's the revision ID. Here's the checksum of the revisions. So it's not just resolving off of version numbers. It's resolving off of content, and it's resolving off of a canonical, like single location place where you can get that dependency. And from there, you just say, I want to push this policy that I just built to the Chef server and give it a policy group. So I can say, I'm going to push this policy file to QA, and then QA on its machine has a policy name and policy group declared, and it asks the Chef server, hey, Chef server, I am web server and I'm in QA, give me my policy file, and it downloads it, and it downloads all of the cookbooks that are also uploaded to the Chef server from that push command, and then runs it just like any other Chef run would go.
So just to follow up on that a little bit, I know one of the best things about the policyfile.lock file is it's easy to version. So Michael, how do you version yours? Do you commit it to Git, or how do you version your policyfile.lock?
Yeah, we do. We put it in Git alongside that policyfile.rb, and so that's another cool thing. Is each one of the policy files, when they're the lock files, when they're generated, get an ID, kind of a GUID, I guess, that would be the ID of that version, and you can see in your Chef run what that version is. So you have traceability all the way back to exactly what you're running. And then another part of our process at NCR is anytime we do an upgrade, we have people analyze the risk, and they will take a diff between the policy file that they're upgrading and the one that was there. So you can do a git diff of a file all the way back and see what kinds of dependencies are coming into the new one. So sometimes you might have a a supermarket dependency that you've upgraded. You didn't really think about that or know it, but it's there, and it's completely in the JSON file. And in that sense, the JSON file is very readable to tell you exactly what's happening in changes in Git.
Awesome. So continuing on a little bit, it definitely sounds like Policyfiles is an excellent feature, and there's clearly a lot of passion around it. So the next question is, what keeps people from using it?
I can take that if
Go right ahead.
So that was actually a question that we received a lot from some of the teams that had been using Chef for several years at Bloomberg. They asked, like, "Hey, Chef's working great for us, but why should we move to using Policyfiles?" And in fact, when we explained everything great about Policyfiles, it usually came up that Policyfiles doesn't not support roles in the sense where you can apply a role to several nodes and then have the and then basically have the run list be created on on the server side, and that's because the run list is built resolved beforehand. So it's resolved at the time that the policy file is actually built, which could be on a build machine or on a developer's workstation, depending on where it happens in your build pipeline. So that's been our largest kind of hurdle for new teams joining that want to use policy files. But generally, if we were able to show that if you compartmentalize your cookbooks using wrapper cookbooks, things like that, you can use role cookbooks. You don't actually need to use roles, and in fact, I think everyone tends to be a lot more happy when they don't have to bump versions constantly in cookbooks because of the cryptographic checksum inside of policy files. So that's been our main observation from when we have a couple dozen teams actually using Chef.
There's a common criticism that I hear about policy files, and it's basically a lot of the constructs that were described in terms of pulling all of your content together, managing versions, making sure that this is what's applied to your node, fundamentally are not new features. They exist elsewhere in Chef. Policy files give you one cohesive way of seeing that, and perhaps aside from the fact that you're seeing checksums of content as opposed to versions, I think that's probably the only net difference, and that you can see everything in one file. But at larger scales, what I usually hear from organizations is that what you're doing is you're creating this immutable artifact that is unchangeable and applying that directly to a node, and the only way to change that is to directly touch that node and tell it to use a new version of this artifact. So there's a lot of plumbing that you need to write around managing that. And when you get back to taking one artifact and applying it directly to one node, in some ways you sort of end up back at the same golden image sprawl problem, which is you have all of these artifacts that now need to be maintained. You can maintain them, but you still have to maintain them.
And on that note, I know one of the stated goals of policy files is to make it easier to get started with Chef. At Chef, that's one of the main criticisms we've received, in that it's very hard to get started with it. So those of you who have used policy files, do you think Chef is easier to learn for new user with policy files versus the traditional roles and environments?
After having taught internal courses with both policy files and not policy files at Bloomberg, we came to realize that we don't think it's any more difficult. We just think that for people who actually understand the Chef, I don't know if you pre-policy file fundamentals, that they tend to have more questions about what the actual differences are between that and using policy files. For new people that we onboard, we actually find that giving them a concrete workflow with either a small slide deck or like a README page inside of GitHub is super useful to get them started very quickly. I think one of the downsides is that we generally point people to look at learn.chef.io because it's excellent documentation. But a lot of the kind of tutorials that go through there are if not all of them, are Chef fundamentals, not using policy files.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Like when when you have in your mind sort of a mental model and you have an understanding of how a system works, and then you switch to a different mental model or a different way of working, you often question, why doesn't this work exactly the way that it works in my mind, right? We see that not just with customers moving to Policyfiles, but you see that with people that are brand new to Chef that are used to managing their systems by hand, people that move from other frameworks like Puppet, like I just want Chef to act like Puppet. Heck, you see it in programming languages all the time. A Java developer who starts writing Ruby, their Ruby feels a lot like Java for the first N months that they're writing Ruby, right? And so it is interesting, I think, to look at that.
Yeah, for us, I would say it takes people 25% of the time to onboard with Policyfiles than not with Policyfiles. And the reason I say that is because when you're going through a Chef Fundamentals course with a group, and you're just doing it the regular Chef way, or I'll call it legacy, I'll just throw that word out. The legacy Chef way, you're gonna have to figure out what a role is, you're gonna have to figure out what a environment is, pinning, how to push a single cookbook up, how that all relates, how to check the Chef server. And with Policyfiles, you just run and you're up and you're running. And so when you think about onboarding and you get people as successful as early as possible, that creates momentum. And that momentum is generated with Policyfiles. So I think from a Chef community perspective, Nathan, your point is correct in that it's difficult to switch what's been working for you. And I don't necessarily advocate people switching just because we're all cool on this podcast. We're saying that Policyfiles are great. If you're starting a new project or onboarding a new team, Policyfiles could really benefit that team in getting them onboarded. I guess not to steer it too much, but another possible reason why people don't use Policyfiles is a little bit of what George was talking about, in that Policyfiles aren't currently supported as a part of Chef Automate. And so I'm an enterprise customer, we're an enterprise customer at NCR. That's important to us. And so it kind of brings about the perception that perhaps Policyfiles are a dead feature or something like that. And then perhaps, George, you could talk more about this, but I can give a brief description of what my perception is. My perception is that Chef just wants people to be successful. Number one, they've always supported anything I've had with Policyfiles in terms of the feature, and it's been a very great feature for us. But then number two, they're going to prioritize things that will make their community successful, and that will make us successful. And we, the Chef community, have a lot more say in that than maybe we think we do. And so learning the feature, trying it out, and making it successful for you is a step in the right direction toward broader adoption and broader alignment with the Chef enterprise features, I would say.
Yeah, and so Michael, you mentioned a blog post that George wrote, and I just want to bring in a question that we got from Twitter from Sean Wahlberg. He said, given a recent post from George, and this post that he mentioned specifically was on Policyfiles, push jobs, and provisioning, and clarity on the current state of each one of those three projects. But his question was, should I invest my time in using Policyfiles or not? So George, maybe just for our listeners who haven't read those blog posts yet, you could give us a quick rundown on what these blog posts are that we keep talking about, and sort of where you're headed with this series, and then also answer the question of, should I invest my time in using Policyfiles or not?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a ton to unpack there. So one, yes, absolutely. At Chef, we want you to be successful. We want you to do the thing that's right for you. In terms of this blog post series, there was a bit of resounding feedback from the Seattle Community Summit, basically stating that there are a couple of tools in the ecosystem that didn't really seem to have super clear direction, just because Chef software as an entity was not really investing in developing new features. And so a lot of times this left folks with questions about, well, are these features supported? Are they dead? Should I be investing in them? So this blog post series aims to provide some clarity around where exactly we stand with those. So I call them the 3 Ps, policy files, push jobs, provisioning. And specifically with policy files, I think there's a really great use case. And I would absolutely echo Michael's observations that when getting started, when on-ramping folks into learning Chef, it's very easy to grok what's happening inside of a policy file. In fact, it's very easy to just look at one place, understand where this is all being assembled, rather than thinking about an object-oriented way of developing, right, and having dependencies that are just sort of magically resolved in the back end. It's very easy to understand what happens, what's going on, and how it all comes together. But I think what can happen at times is because it's going back to an artifact-based approach, where if we say we change an underlying cookbook, I'll pick NTP because I used to maintain the NTP cookbook, right? We do something that's so fundamental to all of the systems that we touch. If we were to update the NTP cookbook, and that's in use everywhere, and we have 12 or 15 different artifacts or policies that we're managing, we have to go rebuild all of those individual policies, figure out which nodes those are being applied to, and then methodically go update those. Whereas in some of the other workflows, like following the role cookbook pattern or using Burks or the environment cookbook pattern or cookbook version pinnings, all we have to do is update that cookbook, update the pinning, and then let Chef go from there. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there, meaning that you're giving up some of that maybe upfront grokability and understanding everything from one easy-to-see view for a lot of flexibility in the long term. And which one you should choose really depends on how complex your infrastructure is, right? Is the juice worth the squeeze? Should we really do it? Don't know. But policy files are just yet another way to solve this. And I think potentially a good analogy for some of what's happened with policy files is that XKCD cartoon about competing standards, right? There are 14 different competing standards. Hey, let's make one to rule them all. And now we have 15 competing standards. So I think we saw a little bit of that with policy files, and it's a very good solution, and it works in some very particular situations. So should you use policy files? If you fit in one of those niche situations, if it works really well for you, or if you're okay with the amount of management complexity that comes with it, absolutely do it. It's a supported tool. It works in the Chef ecosystem, and just because we're not developing features for it doesn't make that solution any less valid.
And George, I just want to clarify, by supported, do you mean that, I mean, I know there's no new features being developed for it, but it sounds like if something breaks, Chef as a company will address what's breaking and fix it.
Yeah, and two important distinctions there. One, Chef software on our roadmap, we are not releasing new features for policy files. If somebody in the community were to develop a new feature because, hey, open source and community, yes, absolutely. We take pull requests, we'll iterate on it, but Chef software officially on our roadmap, we are not releasing new features for it. And if something does break, if it is non-operable, then yes, of course, we'll support it. We will fix it and make sure that this tool continues to operate.
Yeah, and George, I guess I'm trying to unpack what you were saying in my mind about management complexity of using policy files. So if I were to, maybe I can give my interpretation of it and get your response to that. So if you're just getting started with Chef, and this is what I would say, and I'm just an NCR employee over here, I would say use policy files. It's easy. You're 4 commands away from getting your stuff running. Okay. If you're, so that would be the simple edge of the spectrum. The complicated edge of the spectrum, if you're a company like NCR or Bloomberg, and you have this massive need for change management and high security needs, you should be using policy files, I would say. unless you have this really high degree of maturity around that with something like Jenkins or Chef Workflow or whatever it is, then keep going with that. But Policyfiles is a great thing for that. Then there's this sort of middle group of people who have enough complexity of the infrastructure where they just want to throw their, their single cookbook update into their, dozens of nodes and make it work. And they don't want to have to recompile everything. They don't want to have to deal with all of that. And so for those people, they may want to think twice about whether it's more important to have good change management, which what Policyfiles would give you, with no surprises, or whether they're fine with having less change management and at the risk of some surprises. And so that's the trade-off that I think really does hit the dozens of nodes type of Chef users, which I guess would be the majority of our community. And that's the management complexity you're talking about. Did I interpret that the right way?
Yeah, I'd say that's a fair way to interpret it. And I think there are a couple of situations where using Policyfiles really is just a whole lot of win, right? And if you're trying to get started quickly and easily, and your infrastructure has a very small footprint and is easy to grok, absolutely, like you're off and running, and it's very easy to manage. If you are maybe a larger organization, and similar to the situation Bloomberg found themselves in, you're trying to onboard a large set of folks, and you're giving up a lot of the control necessarily of what is changing at what speed, and you're losing some of that communication. You want that tight granularity because cookbook dependency management is kind of unfurled into this unmanageable problem. Then yeah, absolutely. I think the granularity and the guarantees that Policyfiles give you are great. If you're in an organization that has very strict change management controls, or maybe you're an organization that is new to automated change management, and you're trying to sell the idea that code is going to automatically go change these things, and you need a little bit of an extra guarantee to kind of really flesh out auditability and have zero surprises, then Policyfiles may be for you. And then I think one of the things we didn't talk about yet is what you can do with Policyfiles is take that entire solution bundle, tar it up, right, ship it to a node, and apply it with Chef Solo, which works great in air-gapped environments, or environments that may not necessarily have a lot of connectivity or have a lot of restrictions. So I think in those use cases, absolutely, Policyfiles are a great place to start, and probably the solution that you need overall.
I think one thing that has been brought up a lot by Michael and myself is change management, and some of the things that that I found up until recently, there hasn't been a clear kind of documentation of what Policyfiles don't support, and I know that's some of the common questions that we'll get from people that come from legacy Chef to using Policyfiles. Can you have multiple Policyfiles per node? No, not right now, not currently. There is an RFC for that, but that currently is not supported. Can Policyfiles be nested? No, that can't happen. And I think the nature of some of the answers to those questions are really need to focus around the fact that it's meant because of change management, not because of a limitation in necessarily the tool.
So for those who have heard this and have decided that policies might be appropriate for the particular problems they're trying to solve, I know a great place to start is Michael's blog post on HedgeOps. That's HEDGE-OPS.com/policyfiles, all one word. We'll make sure to include that in the show notes. It's a great tutorial kind of focused approach to Policyfiles, and it was very helpful for me in getting started with them. So thank you for that blog post, Michael.
Thank you. That was one of the things that came out of the Chef Community Summit, is that really the things people were telling me were that they just needed more education on the feature and its benefits. So that was my attempt at it. Also, there is a Policyfiles channel on Slack that I'm active on, answering questions to try to build interest in the feature.
Cool. So if you are getting started with Policyfiles, definitely join that Chef community Slack and hang out in that Policyfiles room. I think it's also pretty interesting to me when we look at the variety of solutions that Chef offers, how Policyfiles and some of its sort of design goals, like the idea of immutability, the idea of packaging everything up together, how some of those design goals and sort of resurface when we start looking at application automation with Habitat. You see some of the same patterns happening, of course, in a completely different way, a completely different approach. But I think as an industry, when we see these patterns resurfacing in different technologies, it's just more sort of validation that these are the right patterns, these are the right approaches to the things that we're trying to do. And then the other thing that I just want to make a quick comment on, you know, Policyfiles, it's kind of it's a new way of doing Chef, and maybe new is in quotes because they've been around for a bit now, but it's a new way. It's kind of a cutting edge, bleeding edge way of doing Chef, if you will. But I'd just like to reflect on the fact that the customers that we have today on the show that are using Policyfiles and are so strongly behind it aren't, you know, garage startups. We're talking about Bloomberg and NCR. These are people that handle your money. When you go to a restaurant or a retail shop, you're giving money to NCR, and Bloomberg is watching all of that money as it flows through. So that's I think pretty interesting. All right, we're not quite at the end, but we're getting close on our time. We have about 15 minutes left. I just wonder, maybe we could go around and get some final thoughts on Policyfiles. Should I use them? What's the future of them? I'd love to hear each one of you, like one more insight, and then we'll move on to the picks. So you can go in any order you want. Just, you know, step all over each other. It's good.
I'll hop in, I guess. Yeah, I spend a lot of time working on them. I think they're great. I'm biased. I mean, there's any number of quotes from famous authors you could pick to describe why that might be the case. I think what I do want to say when it comes to, like, should you use them, I think sort of the safety and change control stuff that you get with them, I think there's sort of no way around, like, as you become more mature with Chef, like, you absolutely will need them. Where I've seen where I would say, like, there's really, you know, no value to them is where you have sort of, like, lived those experiences for long enough that you have built into your CI pipeline that you have all of that stuff, right? And then you have built just, like, the most perfect fitting glove of safety and automation, like, awesomeness that, like, could be made for your company. Like, yeah, there's no reason. I think if you're starting from scratch, like, yes, like, this is great. And then, like, you do want to get to that pipeline place. Like, there's no, like, there's value there that, like, you won't get just out of, you know, any part of Policyfiles can't give you. And I think that might be a place where you can see, and I know certainly Michael has done some interesting stuff with this, to sort of, as you sort of hit those limitations of Policyfiles, like, your automation around it can be the place where you can fix it. But I guess that was my sort of closing speech is, everyone will need to get to the CI place also. And if you are already there and you've made it exactly the way you want, then yeah, Policyfiles maybe not. But I think if you're getting started, once you start to hit those limitations, that's when you know that you need to get to that CI place also.
I'll go ahead and go next. And when Policyfiles came out, the primary product I work on as an engineer at Chef is Supermarket. And me and our other supermarket developer, Rob Kidd, immediately started having a conversation, you know, should we convert to Policyfiles? And the right answer for us right now is no, because we have a well-established network of roles and environments, and we have a CI pipeline with Jenkins and Chef workflow. If we were starting from scratch, building new supermarket architecture, I would absolutely go with Policyfiles. But for having a legacy setup, in more ways than one, it made more sense for us to keep doing what we're doing right now. So I guess my closing point would be, it depends on the situation and the problem that you're trying to solve.
I can kick up. So my closing thoughts are, and I'll actually agree with what Nell just said. We actually deployed an internal private supermarket. Thanks, Nell. And we did it with Policyfiles because it was the first time we were using Policyfiles, and it worked very well for us. But I think when you're in a large organization where you have a potentially a lot of deployment targets, and you want to be sure that consistency across all of them, be it different versions of Linux or be it different flavors of Unix. For us, we've found that it's very useful to use Policyfiles to be able to ensure consistency, and more importantly, we still have to build our own. We know as a large organization, we're going to need to build our own tools that fit into our enterprise system ecosystem that all of our other tools work with. So there's always going to be gaps, but Policyfiles seem to fill the right thing for us.
I'll go. So I think I would agree with the take that managing your infrastructure via Policyfiles is a different methodology. I think it has a fundamental philosophy that's different from some of our other solutions. I think that view of taking a holistic top-to-bottom approach of everything that your application needs to run and managing that in one easy-to-understand place is absolutely key, and I can understand why that's very appealing. If you find that sort of approach appealing, I would very much encourage you to look at Habitat, because Habitat, I think, tries to take that view of the world, and I think Policyfiles take that and apply that to your Chef code. So it's a very interesting way to look at the dependency resolution problem and just kind of look at the overall configuration management problem and how to apply that in one cohesive, consistent way. What I will say about using Policyfiles is that I agree with some of the sentiments that, perhaps if you've already gone through some of the pain or you have a CI pipeline that's managing these processes for you, you may not need it. But even if you do go the route of using Policyfiles, I think it's absolutely still key to have that managed in a CI pipeline. These are artifacts that you're generating after all. And I still speak to a number of customers that are managing images, whether it's an AMI or a Docker container with Chef, and that's great, but have your CI jobs manage that pipeline and manage cleanup of it for you to make it all maintainable. So I think there's a really good place for Policyfiles, and I would absolutely love to see if there's interest in the community and where it goes. And just speaking one last time for Chef software, what we go where our users are. And so far, we have not seen a very large uptake of Policyfiles. But if the community finds this useful, if this is a solution that really resonates, then of course, we'll revisit some of our solutions. And just because we are not releasing features for Policyfiles today, that doesn't mean that this should not continue to get developed by the community, or that we've taken a step back. We just want to see where it goes and where the biggest value is for our users.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing to take away from this. The thing that has frustrated me the most in the past, and I guess maybe my biggest learning point that came out of Chef Community Summit, is that Chef isn't your typical software vendor. If you're in an enterprise where you're just sort of beholden to whatever the three product managers think is important, they are much more about community and much more about what is working than your typical software vendor. And so as I had a conversation about Policyfiles at ChefConf and with the group at Open Space, and some of the people there were like, yeah, this would solve my problem, but it's a dead feature, right? And And so I think one of the messages I wanted to bring out as a part of this episode is that it's not a dead feature. It's fully supported by Chef. It's not on the roadmap for Chef Automate currently, but you, the listener or the user, could have something to do with that. And so I would just reiterate and speak to a couple of different people. If you're new to Chef, you should consider Policyfiles and check out my blog post, because I think it will make it much easier to onboard. Or if you're a sales engineer that is onboarding somebody, something like that. And then the second group is if change management and security or air-gapped environments are important to you, then you should really consider my blog post and consider the feature, and even reach out to me and talk to me about it, because I'd like to see this feature get its due respect within the community.
Awesome. Thanks very much. And so as my final thought, I'll just share the thing that I love most about the Chef community, and that is that we don't stand still. When I first started using Chef, there was no such thing as Burkshelf. Heck, there weren't even ways for us to automatically write automated tests against the Chef cookbooks and recipes that we were creating. So we've introduced over the years a number of improvements to the workflow, a number of improvements to the way that you operationalize Chef and your automation, and I think that that's been very, very powerful. And I think with each one of these enhancements, you know, whether it's Burkshelf or Policyfiles or Habitat or Chef Automate with workflow, it all comes down to what are the outcomes you're trying to drive within your organization. How do we ensure that we can reach those outcomes with as little friction as possible? And so sometimes that means new technology, sometimes that means new workflow, oftentimes it means both. And so that's really freaking awesome, frankly. So we're just about out of time, so I want to move us to our final segment for the episode, and that is our picks. This is a moment where we'll go around and ask each one of our panelists to share something that they find themselves using, maybe they find themselves drinking, whatever, just something that they think that you might be interested in for, you know, to check out. John, I know you have some. I'm not sure about everyone else, but since I know you have some, we'll go with you first for picks.
Yeah. So the first pick for me this week is if you don't know what to buy someone and they're an avid reader or they listen to audiobooks, I would definitely do Amazon's Kindle subscription. It's $9.99 a month, and it's literally all you can eat or read or listen to audiobooks. The coverage for audiobooks is not as comprehensive as Audible, but all of the actual audio recordings come from Audible. So since that's an Amazon subsidiary. My second pick would be if you're a fan of flight sims and specifically space simulators, Elite Dangerous. Love the game. I've sunk way too many hours into that game, but it's one of those games that you can fly around the Milky Way in 1-to-1 scale. It's pretty wild. That's it for me.
Awesome. I'll go next. My first pick is a little bit self-serving. I'm working on a project that is currently called Cafe that I am in active development with. And next week, I'm going to spend the entire week on it. I'm on vacation and going to spend a week of my vacation coding this thing. And it's going to make running Chef, especially on Windows, extremely simple. And I'm really excited about it. Would love your feedback, especially if you're coming from the Windows side. My second pick is Bloody Marys. They're awesome. And I had my first one yesterday. And I always thought of Bloody Mary as kind of an alcoholic drink a little bit. It had that you know, the alcoholic, like, stayed up all night drinking, has the Bloody Mary in the morning. And so I stayed away from them. But it's totally not like that. It's spicy and awesome and a great experience, especially in the morning. So have a Bloody Mary. And then my final pick is the song called by Macklemore called 10,000 Hours. It's a great, like, get yourself motivated to do something special kind of song. So I highly recommend listening to it.
All right, my picks are one is an app for iOS called Round. It's a medication management app. I had shoulder surgery recently and was on quite a cocktail of medications afterwards. And, taking medication twice a day, I can keep it in my head, but more than that, forget it. So this app has been really helpful. It's both on my iPhone and there's an Apple Watch integration with it for reminding me when it's time to take medications and which ones I'm supposed to take. The second is the Broadway musical Allegiance, starring George Takei. Last week, that musical was broadcast live to movie theaters around the country. And it has all the things that make a musical great, but it is about very dark subject matter. It's about Japanese internment camps in World War II. But there's at the moment at the end where one of the main characters unexpectedly finds redemption. And the great thing is that neither the audience or the character are expecting it. And it's one of few times in my life where I've been in an audience and everyone just let out this collective sob. It was such a moving moment. So I'm hoping that they'll broadcast it again. And if they do, I highly recommend going to see it.
Great. So I have some picks, and I can't believe no one has yet called out Rogue One.
Hey, no spoilers, please. We're still
I'm not going to spoil anything.
All right.
I haven't
Very
seen it
good.
either.
I actually remembered that after I finished.
I'm sure everybody that's listening has probably already gone to see it, but I won't spoil it. However, I will say that it turns out all I ever wanted was a semi-original story with decent acting set in the same Star Wars universe that I know and love. I've been on the fence with any of the movies since the original trilogy, and I loved it. So if you're on the fence, if you're kind of iffy about it, definitely go check it out. I think you might enjoy it. My second pick comes from a discovery I made this weekend, which is a guy by the name of DJ Adam 12. He has a 5.5-hour Purple tribute, which is a great collection of a number of phenomenal Prince songs. It's an homage to one of the great many talents that we lost in 2016. So I'll include that in the show notes. It's available on SoundCloud. It's a great way to spend an afternoon. And then last but not least, I'm going to call out a book that I came across a long time ago called the Tacopedia. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an encyclopedia of all the different types of tacos that you can have. It's a great tour around Mexico and looks at different ways to put these together, different ways to make them yourself. And this book only used to be available in Spanish, and I just discovered last week that it's been translated into English. So I'll leave that in the show notes as well. But if you like tacos nearly as much as I do, this book will blow your mind.
Sold.
Wow, that's amazing. Let's see. So before the show, I was thinking about what it was like when we were developing environments in particular. I think when it started with Chef, like roles were still new and we were like fixing them. And, like we didn't really give maybe as much thought to like the user experience and so on as we could have. We were like, oh, I'm going to like be an awesome engineer and model this technology. And I like the way that we do it now a lot better. And one of the big things that's helped us to improve is getting training from Jeff Patton, which if your company wants to spend that money, you should tell them they should. And if they want something maybe a little bit less expensive, there's a book called User Story Mapping by the same author. And goes over most of the stuff, and that is very good. And that will absolutely help you level up your team and think about what to build in a way that is going to be successful for you, or at least a lot more successful for us than what we used to do. And then for fun stuff, it's not super new, but I know some people are still getting into it. We have a back channel on the Chef Company Slack for movies and TV. So I see that it's the case. Expanse. Season 2 of the TV show is coming out, and new book just came out. And they're awesome. And if you get that lifetime book subscription that was mentioned earlier, you will have many, many, many hours of fun time reading that book series, because there's like 7 of them now.
Awesome. All right, well, thank you all for your picks. I'll go through mine as well. So one of my picks is kind of a thing that I think everyone who's listening to this show must experience at least once, and that is a DevOps Days conference. If you've never been to a DevOps Days, I highly, highly encourage you to go. And importantly, bring a friend along or bring a coworker along. DevOps Days are all about collaboration. DevOps is all about collaboration, so bring someone with you to a DevOps Days. I recently had the pleasure of going to DevOps Days in Tel Aviv, which was amazing. So one of my other picks is the country of Israel. If you've never been, absolutely go to Israel. And then kind of following up on that, the food in Israel was amazing. Some of you that know me know that one of my great loves in food is corned beef hash. In Israel, they have this dish called shakshuka, which is essentially a pan that gets baked, and it's tomatoes and spice and poached eggs that are all baked in with it. And oh my gosh, it's life-changing. I mean, it's like the Israeli version of corned beef hash. It was so delicious. I'm sure I'm going to find a recipe and make that Christmas morning for the Harvey household. So shakshuka, check it out. In Israel or in Tel Aviv, there's a place called Dr. Shakshuka's, so you can go and get it from the doctor, which is pretty awesome.
Next time you're in Portland, I have an amazing shakshuka for you.
Awesome. I love it. Now I'm going to come to Portland because I will seek it out. All right. Well, thank you all so much for coming on the show today. It's been a really, really great episode. I think it's both been practical and technical, and I hope that the listeners have learned something over the course of the past hour. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Nell and I are committed to making sure that this show continues and has some more frequent episodes than what we did in 2016.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some of the shows that we have planned coming up, or some of the topics at least, we want to meet with the sous chefs, which is a group of people that have sort of in the community have taken on sort of stewardship of some community cookbooks. So we'll have those folks on in January. And then a couple of other topics that we're looking to schedule include a topic on A3 thinking. So if you're familiar with A3, we'll have an episode that's all about that. And if you're not, you should, well, either way, you should tune into that episode. We also recently announced, in partnership with AWS OpsWorks for Chef Automate, which is an expansion of OpsWorks itself. And we want to do an episode on that, so check that out. And then I'm also thinking we'll do an episode on Terraform. It's something that I know we use.
Yay!
We use internally a lot, and it's used throughout the community. So let's talk.
That too.
Yeah, let's talk about Terraform and how that gets used and what it's for and so forth. So listeners, if you have additional topics that you'd like us to explore or discuss, we'd love to hear from you. You can drop us a note into the Food Fight channel on the Chef Community Slack. We also have a Food Fight org on GitHub. If you go there, you'll see a bunch of show notes and so forth. You can add pull requests there about topics that you'd like to hear from. Or you can email us at info@foodfightshow.org, or just tweet us at foodfightshow. And yeah, with that, I would like to thank you all for listening. Wish you a happy holiday season and a lovely end to 2016 and a very successful 2017 for you. And until next time, chefs, keep it hot.